Thank you to all my channel members, including my fan appreciation level members and my contributor level members, for helping support the YouTube channel. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my December 2024 reading review. In the month of December, I set a goal of reading a total of 10 books, 5 tomes or books over 500 pages, and 5 non-tomes. And I exceeded that goal. I met it and exceeded it. I actually did 11 books, 6 of which were tomes, and 5 of which were not tomes. So I had a great reading month. I'm very happy I was able to read everything I wanted and was able to try out a new subgenre. Unfortunately, that wasn't a great subgenre. But, so I'm going to go through and talk about the books from the worst to the best and talk about what my book of the month is. So I'm going to start out with, unfortunately, you have to start with the worst, and that was Heir of Broken Fate by Mads Rafferty. This was I finished all the books this month and I have 2 days left. What am I going to do? I decided to read Heir of Broken Fate. And this is a romantasy book. It's self-published by Mads Rafferty. She has a great YouTube channel you should check out. But I picked this book up because I wanted to try something in the romantasy realm, and unfortunately I just didn't care for this book. I think that romantasy tropes can and will work for me one day, but the way that they're displayed here just did not work for me. And I think that her story structure was her problem. Her writing style wasn't bad, it was just the structure of the story that was just infuriating. And so I did not like it. I gave it like 3.5 out of 10. So yeah, not a great book. So that was the weakest one. The next now one I'll talk about is a Star Trek book, and I don't actually have my copy of it because I put my copy of it somewhere else for the time being, but it's Star Trek: The Pandora Principle by Carolyn Close, and I didn't particularly like this book either. This is a Star Trek book from the original series. It really focuses on the character of Saavik and the character of Spock, and this book made a bunch of promises. The problem was it made too many promises, and it had trouble paying them all off. And while it had some good ideas that I think were really good for Star Trek, I don't think it paid anything off properly. So, that book didn't really work well for me. So, I read that with Literary Treks with my friend Casey there. So if you want a full detailed review, I did a regular review on the channel, but we did a full spoiler review talking about all the details of it in our Literary Treks podcast. I think I gave that one like a 4 out of 10. I did like Obo in that book. If you've read that book and you know the character of Obo, I really liked him. So now those are the 2 books I didn't like. Now we'll go to the books that I actually really, really enjoyed. And we'll start with the book Skipping Christmas by John Grisham. I decided to read, I continue reading John Grisham, one of my favorite authors, and I decided to read in the month of December Skipping Christmas, and decided to release my review on Christmas, where I was wearing a nice Santa hat type thing. It was a lot of fun. And this book it's a silly book. It's really short. It's basically like a novella for John Grisham, but it was fun. It's the cranks, they decide to skip Christmas, and then all of a sudden they need to put it on Christmas Eve. Their daughter comes home and they have to rush and get everything ready in one day. And it's delightful. It's a fun, sweet book. It's not really particularly deep, or it's not particularly amazingly written. The movie I've also seen a couple times. The movie is fine, but this was a fun read. It's like a 6 out of 10. It's a fine, maybe 7 if I'm pushing it, but it was a fun read. I had a blast. I had fun reading it. I read it in one sitting. The next book I'll talk about that I read was Ben Bova's Titan. This is a direct sequel to Saturn. It is one of the most direct sequels in his series. Most of the time, they're kind of loosely connected. This one's, boom, takes place immediately after, all the same characters, like intricately connected. And it's still that political thriller stuff, really tackles some really interesting ideas about birth and abortion, which I thought was really fascinating, and also has some great stuff about AI in the book. That's great, and it also has some great science action. So I had fun with this. It's towards the bottom of my Ben Bova stack, but I still had a blast with it. That tells you how good Ben Bova is. That this is one of his weaker books, and it's still a lot of fun to read. I also read the massive book, To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. I have had this darn book on my shelves for years. I read the first book in 2022 and the second book in 2023, and I was like, darn it, I'm gonna finish this last one, even though I really wasn't looking forward to it. And so I read this book in December, and you know what? It's pretty entertaining. I think it's my favorite of the three books. It's a fun book. I see why people enjoy this series. Tad Williams just spends a little bit too much time, describing, and spends a little bit too much time slowing down the story, and I want the story to speed up a little bit more. And then when the story does speed up, I'm like, hang on, back up. You just glossed over this, and he's like, nah, I want to do all this other stuff. So this stuff I didn't like about it, but as a whole, it's a very, very satisfying payoff to the entire Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. I think that the book should have been split up into two. I think that having it as one massive thing did not work as well as I think Tad Williams would have wanted. But still, it's an entertaining read, and so I gave this one I think a 7.5 out of 10-ish, somewhere around there. Another tome that I read, but is a very different type of tome, is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Again, branching out into new genres. I am willing to try new things. This is a thriller, but not in the style like the John Grisham legal thrillers that I read. This is a mystery thriller about a murder or supposed murder or disappearance that happened, and this character, Michael Blomkvist, leaves his journalism profession to temporarily to go and do this research on this potential murder or disappearance. And also there is this woman involved named Elizabeth Salander who is going around and she stops bad people in her life. And it's a hard read at times, but it was a really interesting, thought-provoking book that I think really tackles some hard issues really well. And it was a fun thriller to read. I liked the mystery of it. So that one I gave like a 7.5-ish out of 10. I also read another tome, and that was George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood, the history book about the Targaryen dynasty. I really had a blast with this book. It's a history book. It's kind of dry in parts, but I just really find the way he writes politics and the way he writes intrigue. I think he's one of the best best writers of political intrigue, despite the fact that it's a fantasy book. It writes political intrigue better than some political writers. So I really had a blast with this book. Could have been cut quite a bit. It's really dense and really small font, so it's only 700 pages, but it's actually way longer. In terms of the feel of it. It feels like a Brandon Sanderson Cosmere book. But anyway, I had a blast with this book, so I'll give this one an 8 out of 10. Good. If you're a Song of Ice and Fire fan, you'll love this book. If you thought those books were okay, this book's probably not for you. It's kind of like the Silmarillion, but easier to understand. All right. We're getting some really good books here. I also read a self-pub book by John A. Douglas titled The Black Crown. This is old school, classic D&D style fantasy book. It really feels like a D&D campaign. It's so fun. The writing starts off really rocky, but as the book progresses, the writing gets a lot more sophisticated, and I was very impressed by the growth that you see within the book by John Douglas. Within the book, you see his writing style grow, and I was very impressed by what we got at the end. And it's a fun book. You will have a smile on your face through a lot of this book because it's a fun book to read. It's long. It is particularly long for a debut from a self-published author. It's about 650 pages, about I think 190 something thousand words. But I had a blast with it. I had a lot of fun. I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Speaking of books, I'll give 9 out of 10 and self-published books. Also, I read Alex the Great by Rebecca Lynham, who was actually, full disclosure, one of my old high school teachers. She was my high school German teacher. And I had this book on my shelves, and I reconnected about a month or so ago with Miss Lynham, and I was like, you know what? It's a short book. It's a middle grade book. I'll read it. And I was so delighted by this book. It's so fun. It's a really short read. I read this in between tomes. It kind of was like a palate cleanser type thing. But this book is a delightful read. It's about a girl who just doesn't fit in. All the other girls are focused on school and sports and cheerleading and boys, and all she wants to care about is her animals at home. And there's also a boy in here who really likes Alex, but he's worried about how he will convey that. And there's also some deep themes about loss and about PTSD and moving on and stuff. And I just think that Rebecca Lynham did a tremendous job with the book. So I really, really enjoyed this one. Another like 9 point something out of 10. It was really, really good. My next book that I read, and I seem to be one of the only people that likes it this much, was Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. Everybody else has given it like a 3 or 4 stars out of 5. And I won't lie, it's not the best Cosmere book, not by a long shot. But I loved it. I loved all the Kaladin scenes in here. I thought that Kaladin was handled so well. I thought that Dalinar's story was so interesting. I thought the showdown at the end was interesting. I loved the pacing of this book. This book had, to me, great pacing overall. And I also, even though I could have cut a bit, but I still, for a Stormlight book, this had pretty good pacing, I felt. And I really liked all the questions that it left at the end, all the Cosmere connections. I finally understand the Cosmere better because of this book. So long I just didn't understand the Cosmere. And in some ways I still don't, but I know I understand it better having read this book. And I liked it. I really liked it. It is not the best one, as I said. It's better than Rhythm of War, at least. But I had a blast with this one. And I am looking forward to what happens next with not only the Stormlight Archive, but with the Cosmere as a whole. And we're going to get Elantris too soon. Woohoo! Anyway, so this was great, but this was not my book of the month. No. You would think that with so many great books up here that, one of those would be my book of the month. No. My book of the month was Star Wars Darth Maul Shadowhunter. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did. I picked it up and I realized how short it was. And I was like, I could probably read this in a day. And I did, because it is such a great thriller monster book. Imagine reading like a slasher horror villain book, but the monster is Darth Maul. And you have a Jedi, and you have a bounty hunter, and you have kind of a middleman who's involved with some nefarious stuff, and you've got an informant, and you've got all these people who are basically like the people that are being attacked. And so you're wondering which one's going to be the final girl. And it is handled very interestingly. And I was attached to the characters. I thought it was a delightful story. I think that it writes a thriller well for Star Wars, but it also still felt like Star Wars. It was a tremendous tie-in to the Phantom Menace, I felt, and it all takes place, except for like one scene, almost entirely takes place on Coruscant. And so that made it just such an interesting thing, because I love exploring the depths of Coruscant. So I had a blast. I loved this book. I cannot believe how much I loved this book, because I was just like, well, it's one of the Legends books. I may as well get to it eventually. No, I loved it. I thought it was great. And so I'm so happy that I love this, and I have many more Michael Reeves books on my shelves to be read. So this was my book of the month. And if you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them. What books did you read in December? What would your book of the month be? What would be your worst book of the month? Things like that. And tell me what you're reading in January. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.